Welcome everyone. This is the second in our series on the brain-body connection. And today we're going to talk about exteroception. But before I do, I just wanted to refresh our memory on interoception. So interoception we defined as the ability of the brain to process signals coming from our internal organs. So that, for instance, if you have a stomach ache, you say, do I need Tums or do I need to go to the doctor? And the way we do that is we compare our present experience to our past experience or memory. So if we have a memory of a similar pain and we took a Tums before, then actually we go, well, that's that, we'll just take a Tums. But if it's something quite different and we are afraid and we don't recognize it at all, then we have to decide what our next step will be. And if it feels life-threatening, we'll call the doctor. So interoception is this ability of us to use our past experience compared with our present moment experience and then decide what to do next. And I wanted to also bring up something that I learned recently is how our body knows we're thirsty. Do you know this? It's really fascinating. So what happens is, if you're thirsty and you need fluids, your body actually reduces the volume of blood in your system. And what that means is then the salinity is increased. And that's a signal to your brain to say, oh, you have to drink fluids. So you go and you get something to drink, and sure enough, almost instantaneously, you feel like your thirst is quenched. But it actually doesn't, the fluids don't reach your blood system for 10 to 20 minutes. So I thought it'd be interesting to try that if you wanted to eat less. So let's say 20 minutes before a large meal, you might have an apple or some celery. And then when you have your dinner or whatever, you would eat just a little bit less. And who knows, you might actually lose some weight. Anyway, just a thought. So now let's dive into exteroception. So that is the ability of the brain to process signals coming from the external world. And we do that using our five senses. So vision, taste, touch, hearing, and smell. And scientists posit that basically about 60 to 90% of the incoming data we receive is through our visual system. And so what that means is that we can identify, let's say if it's a car, oh, we know that that shape, that movement is a car. And so we can automatically make that assessment and then judge, do we need to move out of the way if the car is moving quickly or not? So we don't take precious seconds to assemble the individual pieces again. We just call on our memory. And as Lisa Feldman Barrett says, it's actually an energy efficient hack on the part of our brain. It doesn't want to have to work so hard. So it relies on our past experience, compares it to the present moment, and then predicts what our next behavior will be. And the cool thing is that we are constantly doing that. We don't just make an assessment once. We just don't go, oh, that's a car. We keep thinking, is the car moving? How fast is it moving? Is it coming towards me? Do I need to get out of the way? So we're constantly assessing and refining the information, never ending. It's a never ending survival tactic. We are always on guard. And I'll give you an example actually. I was in my husband's studio last week and I heard this tremendous noise on the roof and my body immediately went like this. And I thought, what is that? And so I was in this freeze fright mode. And then I remembered, that's just the squirrels. I don't really have to be that upset. But physiologically speaking, without me even consciously deciding to be afraid, my body froze up. So that's the auditory signals coming through, the ears that send a danger signal that I might be in a dangerous situation and I have to watch out for my survival, and then my brain recognizes that sound and moves into a more calm state. So it's a wonderful survival skill. It's been adapted over millennium and it's really worked incredibly well in the past. But what I want to posit is that a lot of the survival strategies we needed in the last millennium are no longer appropriate. But these survival skills are still extant in our bodies and in our DNA, in our brains. So the question is, since the world has moved so quickly in 200 years, we now have a different set of survival skills, or survival strategies really. And I'm calling them survival needs, soft survival needs. So the idea is we no longer feel like we're going to be eaten by a wild animal, but we do care whether we have a purpose in our life. We care whether we're going to find happiness. We're trying to understand well-being, trying to understand what is consciousness and what is the meaning of life even. And these are very difficult questions, very hard to answer, very hard to quantify, much harder than, will I get my meal tonight? Will that lion over there eat me? So we're in this different state of survival mode that brings anxiety and dis-ease because the modern world has moved so far ahead, and yet our survival skills are still trying to assess the hard, basic survival skills of will I eat tomorrow? And so I'll give you an example. I think that back, millennia ago, a woman who was thin was actually not considered a good mate because they didn't know if they would survive the winter and be able to bear children. And now, of course, there are so many diet books and ways that, people, if they're 5 pounds overweight, they tend to have a terrible self-image. So that's one thing that has changed. Another is that we try and look as young as possible. I mean, there used to be a time where elders were respected. They had a wisdom that was imparted to the rest of the community, and they were revered. And now, of course, a lot of times they're put in old age homes, or maybe they're making silly videos on TikTok. So those things have changed. And we care a lot about this concept of love, which I think may have been just community for millennia. But now we talk about love in terms of, let's say, a relationship or marriage. And I heard this amazing story on one of my favorite podcasts, The Hidden Brain, about marriage. And they said that up until 1750 or 1800, marriage had nothing to do with love. There was no romance involved. It was basically a union of power and economic and wealth. So Antony and Cleopatra, they wanted to combine, Rome and Egypt. Kings and queens of Europe used to get married in order to combine their kingdoms. And on different economic strata, people would get together to combine their farms. And now, of course, there's a very different reason. We really marry for love at this point. And so what this podcast said was around 1750, 1800, men actually decided that they were going to find a woman they were attracted to, and it wasn't going to be based on economic means. And that was because women really didn't have a means to support themselves, so men had the option to choose. And now I think it's kind of reversed, where women are the ones searching for love more often, or that's what I read about in the magazines. So, but that's one way, and children's another indication of how things have changed. So they used to have many children, first of all, to work on the farm and take care of the business, so they could hand it down. They'd have apprentices, and the mortality rate was so high that they had to have a lot of children. And of course, I looked up recently, and Americans have 1.9 children per household. And I think one of the main concerns about having many children is, can we afford them? Just thinking about the education costs and the college debt that's in this country today. These are major concerns about whether to have children or not. And again, I think it comes from this lack of community. We used to be part of a tribe. We used to sit around after the hunters had brought home the catch, and they'd put it on the fire, and we'd all sit around and eat together and watch the stars move through the heavens and wait for the sun to come up. And we were united as a community and a tribe. And I think we've really lost that sense of connection. We live in these little bubbles, our houses, we go to work in our cars, we work in cubicles. And certainly with the pandemic, that's already increased the isolation, because we couldn't go out, and you have to wear a mask, so you don't have that connection. So I feel like we're really missing that sense of community. And you may have 200 friends on Facebook, but do you have real friends? So I read this story in the New York Times a while ago, which I thought was amazing, that this guy overheard these women discussing they were going to have a party, and they didn't want to invite this girl Marissa, so they were going to schedule the party for the weekend when she was out of town. So he heard this story and he put a video on TikTok and said, Marissa, I'm not sure who you are, but if you hear about this video, I just want you to know that these girls are planning a party and they don't want you to be there, but I want to have a party and I want to invite you. And it went viral. Like many people viewed it. And in fact, people who knew Marissa viewed it. And so they were texting her and they were like, I think this is you. And she first was quite embarrassed and didn't want to, sort of confess, but she did. And when she said, oh yeah, that's me, thank you so much, then even more people watched the video and sent her messages saying, Marissa, we want to be your friends, which led her to set up a group called No More Lonely Friends. And the first time they met in New York City a year ago, over 200 people, mostly in their 20s, showed up because they wanted to make friends, not just with Marissa, but with each other, which I love this. And then she's now had it in 6 other cities. And the last time she held it in New York, over 600 people turned up. So we are experiencing a very, very important lack of community and a very increased sense of loneliness. And I think the pandemic has really heightened that. So the idea though is maybe these social tools, these social media tools, which can be such a distraction, can also be a benefit to us. Maybe they can bring us back together. Maybe they can help build a sense of community again. And so we know that interoception and exteroception, have evolved over millennium for one thing, for our survival. And yet the reasons that they were putting us on guard are no longer quite as relevant. So the idea is the brain and the body need to catch up. What's happened in our society in the last 200 years, there's no way our body could have adapted that quickly. So I'm hoping that with awareness, with our understanding that the ideas of fight, flight, and freeze are still extant in our world, but it's no longer whether we will be eaten by a tiger, but whether we will find love. What is the meaning of our lives? So it's these soft skills. And I think through this, our mindfulness practice, really through social media, through connecting, even if it's on Zoom, the way we have our group that has been going for 16 months, we have a sense of community. So we can use these tools to adapt to the needs, our soft survival skills now. And understand that our bodies may still hold in their DNA this physiological response, an autonomic response that brings you into a sense of fright and flight for reasons that aren't considered a survival threat. But still we feel that anxiety, and I think that is a lot of what we're experiencing today. So the idea is, I think if we can use our mindfulness practice, our sense of humanity, understanding what our needs are, and understanding how our body translates those needs, we can become a much more happier, and I would say well-being. We can have a sense of well-being that is really our nature. It's our nature. So let me leave you with a quote from Agnes Varda that I love. She says, if we opened people up, we'd find landscapes. And I just love that because, again, it talks about the shared nature of humanity. It talks about this natural wealth of goodness and wholesomeness, and just healthy living. And I think if we cultivate the gardens inside of us through our mindfulness practice and understand how our body interprets those signals, we'll find a much greater sense of ease and well-being. So thank you so much. And in the next class, we're going to kind of give an overview on polyvagal theory and the wonderful tools that they have for how to explore our internal signals and work with them to, again, have a really enhanced sense of quality of life. So thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.